the unions tried to combat it, but they couldn't even come close. Concentration of capital was so enormous it wasn't even a battle. This picked up again in the 1970s. There's another upsurge with foundations trying to take over the educational institutions, so, Olin professorships of free enterprise and glossy right-wing student magazines, very well funded all over the place, and so on and so forth. It's had an effect. The effect has been to pretty much demolish civil society, to turn people into what is the ideal. Now, the ideal is very clear. The ideal is a completely fragmented, atomized society where everyone's totally alone, doing nothing but trying to pursue created wants, and the wants are created. It's known that they're created. Nobody wants those things. You create wants. People are stuck with their television set or, their interactive, whatever it is. And they're glued to this thing, and they're told what they want, and they have to want it. They don't have any connection with anyone else. You don't see anybody else. You don't deal with anyone else. You're an atom of consumption. And you go to work at lower and lower wages for more and more hours and less benefits and security in a flexible labor market. That's the kind of utopia that they're looking for, and it's not very far from there. It's led to very strange effects in the country. I mean, the country is like a devastated peasant society. You really have to go back to Europe and the Black Death, I think, 14th century, to find anything similar. People are scared, angry, hostile, hate everything, don't know what they hate, don't have anybody else to talk to, just angry, desperate. There are cults all over the place at a scale that is unknown in any other society. I mean, the level of religious fundamentalism alone is probably the highest in the world. I'm almost certain higher than Iran. And that's only one of them. People right now, the militias happen to be on the front pages, but that's just a tiny fragment of it. And it's only not the right. The left is the same. It's across the board. It's just a dissolved society, very scary. The portent is ominous. It's the kind of a situation, and it's a kind of a situation which is indeed reminiscent of Germany in the late 30s in a lot of ways, or Iran in the late 70s. Very frightening, and it's much more frightening when it happens here.
Whenever Groucho is seen, he is chewing at a yardstick of a cigar. Smoking a cigar generally makes a man look solid and dependable. Yet Groucho is reported to be a very insecure person. Is this true?
Well, I think everybody is insecure. I don't mean only in show business, I mean in every business, if you think at all.
Welcome again, folks, to the Washington Babylon podcast. This week, Ken sits down for a conversation with Johnny Eric Williams, a professor of sociology at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and then Elliot Sperber, our new editor of the Aesthetics and Anesthetics section on the Washington Babylon website, and they both are discussing the potential outcomes of the 2020 election and what the left should be doing as a strategy around the matter of Donald Trump.
So, Johnny, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. I'm really excited. I hope you'll be on many times in the future. You've been doing some writing for us. It's great to have you part of Washington Babylon.
And I'm glad to be on.
Well, it's a pleasure. So, before getting the conversation going, I just did want you to introduce yourself to Washington Babylon fans who may not be familiar with your work and your career, which is quite interesting.
Well, I have a PhD in sociology from Brandeis University, which I received in 1995. I've been in academia, a long time, over 30-something years. I've been at my current institution, Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, for 24 years. And I write in the areas of science, religion, politics, social movements, white supremacy, culture, and mass media. So I write in those areas, and that's my research. And that's what I do. And I'm heavily involved in activism, because I don't understand why professors should not try to implement their work, or get people to use it to implement their work to transform the world. And that's what I do in the tradition of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian radical educator, who wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So that's what I do.
Well, I am not an academic, I'm a writer, but we have a lot of overlapping interests, as you know, but I totally agree with you that as a writer, as a journalist, I try to act as well as simply write. You know, there are some writers who do nothing but write. And I think that can be a public service. I mean, no disrespect, but I feel like I want to, at minimum, encourage people to take action. And I certainly, you know, I am involved in politics. It may be the politics of cutting down a sign on a house in my neighborhood that where gentrifiers are trying to move in, and a real estate agent put up a sign that was marketing homes in my neighborhood like potato chips. It offended me, and I just took that sign down. And
my kind of the way I look at the world and the way I frame it and try to understand it is because I grew up very poor in Arkansas, right outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, then in Little Rock itself. My frame is that people who are oppressed, may it be economically oppressed, politically oppressed, religiously oppressed, whatever kind of oppression, gender, sexuality, all those things linked together in that everyday people can transform the world to what they want it to be. And I term it, using Martin Luther King and the social gospel. I'm not a religious person, though I do study religion, teach it. But using the social gospel is the beloved community. And the beloved community for me is a place where there's human decency and dignity, and that no one's trying to prop themselves up above others to make themselves feel better and superior to others, whether we're all in this together, creating a community of love and support and helping each other to grow as human beings. And so it's a system problem for me, right? It's so when people start talking about, it's like I'm, whenever I vote, and I vote to honor the folks who preceded me during the civil rights era, as well as enslavement and Jim Crow era and stuff like that, because they fought hard for the franchise, is that I vote, but I recognize that many of the choices that we have, they are limited choices, that they're basically the same soul with a different name, different gender, on and on and on, right? They're fulfilling the obligation of the oppressive system that is the United States itself in terms of neoliberal, market transactions and racism and sexism and on and on and on, right? And so what I try to do is to get people to see that they have the power to transform systems, that is whole institutions, if they just merely do one thing: do not follow their rules, don't conform. If you don't conform, which is the most powerful thing on earth itself, to just civilly disobey and don't go along with everybody else, you can stop a system in its tracks, right, and transform the world. And this has been done time and time again, but people don't use it. And that's the way you do it, I think, to be successful. And you do it in conjunction with coalitions around the world who are suffering from the same kind of oppressive system, which is not merely domestic, but also international. It is global in nature, this kind of neoliberal capitalist system that breeds all these kinds of other oppression. It is what Patricia Hill Collins termed a matrix of domination, interlocking oppression. And that's the way I approach it.
Well, again, we overlap in many, many ways. I want to now take what you just said, which is very interesting, and apply it to the real world. Mm-hmm. I recently wrote a piece at Washington Babylon that you and I went back and forth on a little bit on Twitter, and I think you were largely in agreement with what I wrote, which was a semi-satirical piece.
Exactly.
It seemed obvious to me. Mm-hmm. It was a piece endorsing Donald Trump in 2020 saying that that would bring about Representative Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to be our president in 2024, even though technically that would require a change in the Constitution. I'm a big fan of Representative Omar. Mm-hmm. Some people took the story entirely seriously. Counterpunch actually ran a 9,000-word rebuttal. That's what I was told. I saw it. I didn't really read it because it just seemed too idiotic. But so I can't vouch that it's actually 9,000 words, but it was a lengthy rebuttal. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get into the rebuttal, but I want to get your thoughts on what I wrote and see, because we may well, and, hey, differences of opinion make life interesting. If we agree on everything, but, if you disagree, I don't have to tell you. I mean, you can trash me. You can say, I think you're full of shit on that one, whatever. But let's talk, because I actually think it's a fundamental question for 2019 and 2020, which is I detest Trump. That goes without saying. I also detested Hillary Clinton. I didn't vote because I didn't want to degrade myself by participating in such a shit show election. Yeah. However, Trump has turned out to be worse than I imagined in many ways. Although I have to say, in some ways, like, he hasn't started a war yet, which, he could tomorrow or this afternoon. But so far, he hasn't. Whereas Barack Obama was engaged in warfare, whether it was bombing or troops, whatever, he was, I think, bombing 7 different countries. Yeah. So I detest Trump. I mean, in particular, and I have a personal connection to this story in multiple ways through friendships and family, the immigration policy, where I am happy to see AOC, who I suggested be Representative Omar's vice presidential candidate in my fantasy world. I was happy to see her use the term concentration camp, because that's exactly what these camps are for immigrants. But my view, what I expressed in the story fundamentally was, Trump's going to win anyway. There's very little hope that a Democrat is going to beat him. You never know. I mean, somebody could emerge from the pack, but most of the candidates don't really inspire me. Bernie, I'm closer to him on his politics, but I feel like he's not going to win. He'll be blocked by whether you want to call it the ruling class, the deep state, the oligarchy, whatever. Or if he becomes the presidential candidate, he'll pick some crap vice president, some conservative Southerner or some conservative Midwesterner to appease the New York Times editorial board. Bernie could easily die in office, and then we've got a crap Democrat instead of, so what I argued was the Democrats are going to lose. It's not that I want Trump to win, but reality is reality. Let's get on with it. And then 2024, it's our turn. Our being people like you and me who want radical democratic change in this country. And by the way, I don't actually think that, obviously, even if they were legally allowed to run, Omar and AOC are never going to win the Democratic nomination because they're too radical for the Democratic Party, which is a broken institution. But all I was trying to say was, hey, fuck it. Let Trump, he's going to win. Let's start thinking about 2024 and how by then, given the Trump reaction by then, how can the left, the Democratic radical left, prepare for 2024? Because that's when I think it's our turn. That's when I think we have a chance to really do something different in this country. Maybe I'm dumb and optimistic, but it was an optimistic article. It wasn't a pessimistic article. I could be full of shit, but that's a lot. Now, what do you have to say?
Well, first of all, when I look at politics in the United States, I understand that the system itself, and I wrote a piece about this shortly after Obama was elected, because I was one of those people who was like, okay, so you elected a president who was black. Okay, so nothing's going to really change because as I said before, they're basically the same kind of mentality with a different name, different gender, different sexuality, on and on and on. That's what they are. They are produced by this system, this political, economic, military system that operates and dominates the country. It's the establishment. That's what you're talking about. Who will resist, Representative Omar and Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. Those are the people resisting because they make their money off of war. It's a war economy. That's what they do, right? So yeah, they're going to resist that. When it comes to Trump, I mean, your premise about Trump. First of all, I recognize that what you wrote was satirical, but what you're really saying though too is in a way is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm very optimistic too, but I'm optimistic on the side of humanity though, right? That the people by saying we know this system is rigged, that we really have no choices. It's between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, right? And so they're not going to ever let a person get up there who's in the interest of everyday people. That's not going to happen in this system which they created. It's their rules, right? And so you get someone like Trump, a rabid, white supremacist, narcissist. I'm concerned that Trump continues to form policy of the United States because when presidents come in, because they are the same mentality, right? They don't really deviate from that foreign policy. They deviate a little bit domestic policy.
So what I'm saying is that Trump will probably not get reelected because there'll be overwhelming turnout. And there will be a new president, but it won't be the kind of president that the people want, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
It will probably be someone like Harris, Biden, maybe even Elizabeth Warren.
Right.
But it will never be Bernie Sanders.
And
right?
why not? Why can't Bernie win?
Because they will steal it. They'll beg, borrow, and steal it. The establishment will ensure that will not happen.
And but if you had your preference, let's say you could pick, because obviously my piece was a satirical piece. I mean, and I said I objected to Bernie on the grounds that, and look, there's an expression, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Bernie's not perfect, but he's very good. But he does things that concern me. He's weak on gun control, in my view. He's from a state very pro-gun, and so he's bowed to those interests. He has not denounced what is clearly an illegal attempt to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which has its problems, but I don't believe in regime change. Mm-hmm. And there are other issues I have doubts about him on. But I also just think the country, and I mean, this is again being, maybe I'm a dreamer, but he doesn't represent certainly the generational change that I think the country needs. I mean, I'd like to see a gender and racial change as well, which is why I posed the issue of Omar and AOC. But even if you say, forget about race and gender because it is what it is. I don't really care for Elizabeth Warren. I just feel like she's stage managed and everything she says is robotic and focus group tested and everything else. And I just don't trust her. I mean, Bernie to me is easily just politically, I'm closer to him than anybody else. But I just worry about the issues I raised. I worry about his age, and I worry that in some miracle, if he were to get the nomination, he picks some terrible vice president, and he'd make all sorts of accommodations with the political elite, and we'd end up with another disappointment. I mean, Obama was a phony from the beginning. I think Bernie is genuine, but so I can't really get behind a Bernie candidacy. But I want to hear, like, I mean, do you plan to vote for Bernie, or do you?
Well, whenever I vote, I write in because I believe that this system is problematic, right? These nuts and ovaries. I'm very much aware that voting has already been restricted to limited choices. I'm not a Democrat, so in my state, we have a closed primary. If you're not a Democrat, you can't vote anyway. So I don't get to choose in the primary. So I'm an independent who I think goes into a situation with my eyes wide open recognizing that if we truly want change, that change will only come from everyday people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to come from the politicians. They will disappoint you every time. It will not come from, it really won't come from AOC. It won't come from Omar. It won't come from any of it. It will come from the people. And I'm not romanticizing that. I'm just saying when people get fed up of being sick and tired, things will change. That's when it will change. But right now, they're not fed up because they're also participating in the system of exploitation. We're better off than other people around the world who we're exploiting. And until those things start to cut off, and they're starting to do that gradually because the United States is in decline with its hegemony around the world, all we have is military might and to try to make people give us what we want and force it through death and destruction. So that ain't going to work all the time. The most effective weapon, as we know, with Antonio Gramsci and the prison notebooks, is this thing called hegemony. It is using culture and material kinds of advantages for people to get them to invest in this system of exploitation and domination around the world. Those things are starting to fall by the wayside. So I'm not really into electoral politics as much as everybody else is. I was in D.C. in 1988 with the Jackson campaign. I saw how these things work. And it's not working. It's not working perfectly. And to take advantage of them, it's not working for the people. Put it that way.
Yeah. No, I, for better or for worse, I share those sentiments. I generally just don't vote, even at the local level. Although here in DC, there are a few local candidates I will back, and at the neighborhood level, I'm trying to get involved because there it's just a different world. You know, even like getting a sign up in your neighborhood saying "deaf child," I mean, is better than nothing. You know, it's a good thing. And so, but
what I'm saying is that it is through this kind of adversity, this struggle that everyday people will go through, because to a great extent, people fear their liberation, fear their freedom, because they don't know what that is. They're used to being told how to operate. But when people start to stop fearing, even just to not really stop fearing, but the fear, but make those steps forward and go on, they get their sense of empowerment and they embrace their power to create change, because the history shapes us, but we also shapes the history in the moment. And that's what I want people to grasp, is that we can do this if we have the courage just to move forward and not be afraid.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I stopped. I had two kids who were super pro Obama, so because I love them, I voted for him in 2008 because they asked me to, even though one of them wasn't even a voting age at the time. I'm not sure either of them were, but in any case, I voted out of respect for my children because I didn't want my own cynicism to dampen their enthusiasm for politics, because I think politics is really important. But otherwise, I haven't voted in ages. I just can't be bothered. I'd rather be taking a nap or, eating a piece of chicken and, having a glass of wine or whatever. It seems so pointless. Yeah. And I agree that the only way things are going to change is if we have a revival of mass movements like the ones that, not exactly identical, but movements like arose in the 60s across the world, not just in the United States, of course.
Exactly.
I think we're on the verge of that in the next few years because the system has run out of legitimacy. And people are fed up. And, I talk to people everywhere I go, I talk to my neighbors. I go to the 7-Eleven and I talk to the cashier. I talk to, I go to a restaurant. Then the emperor has no clothes. I mean, everybody's fed up. And the other thing, speaking of hegemony, the media plays such an incredible role in creating that hegemony. Exactly. And it is an instrument of the power to be.
And that's one of the things that you do with Washington Babylon is that you make it clear that the fourth estate, that is the media itself, is a part of this propagandized machine. And then now the tech industry is a part of it, the fifth estate.
Exactly.
And what they do is they keep us diverted on stuff that's not important and doesn't make us happy, but actually makes us miserable. We don't even know we're fucking miserable, but we are, right?
I know. Exactly. It's the Roman circus. I mean, the other day, I was at somebody's house on 4th of July. And it wasn't, I guess it wasn't really a 4th of July party. It was more of a engagement party, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But during it, there was a TV on in the corner, and I walked over, and it was the Coney Island hot dog eating contest. And I said, if ever there were a sign of American decline, like when you get to the point where, I mean, I've heard about it, and there's an amusing aspect to it, but you had a guy dressed like a carnival barker. It's held at Coney Island, so interesting. But then, you just think about, there are actually millions of people watching this, and then people standing in line at Coney Island. No disrespect. Hey, look, I watch sports. I spent the last few weeks watching the South American football, soccer championship, and I'm really happy Brazil won because I lived there for 5 years. Even though they got a shit right-wing president, but I love the soccer team.
Yeah.
But okay, so I take part in the Roman circus too. But I mean, we are in a state of decline, but I'm actually optimistic because I do think these mass movements are going to form. And what really cheers me up is that not only does the emperor, meaning Trump or Obama or just the federal government and government in general have no clothes, the media has no clothes. People, Trump has successfully used this term fake news in a totally fake, bogus way.
Exactly.
However, it resonates because most Americans detest the media, and they trust the media about this as much as they trust members of Congress, which is about 20 or 10%. So I love to see the media delegitimized, and that is exactly one of the main things we do at Washington Babylon. We try to cover stories that most outlets won't cover, and not just the New York Times or the Washington Post, but even alleged alternative outlets. Don't get me wrong. There's great journalism going on out there, including, I will say, at the New York Times and the Washington Post more and more infrequently. But even there, you can periodically read great stories. There's plenty of great work going on. But the majority of it is drivel and press release shit. And
it sounds like academia. Most of the work published is just jury crap.
Yeah, well, I guess what we're talking about is that whole, I guess, for lack of a better term, the cultural/intellectual world. There's so few. I mean, one of my favorite essays of all time is Noam Chomsky's, I think from 1967, The Responsibility of Intellectuals. And we have an intellectual class that he identified as being outlandishly corrupt. And I think even Noam, who is going to be doing an interview with us soon, I haven't talked to him about the podcast, but for the website. And I'll ask him, because it's, now that you've made me think about it, hey, Noam, in 1967, you wrote that essay. Do you think intellectuals are more or less responsible now than they were in 1967? I'll be curious to hear what he has to say, because I think they're even less responsible.
Well, I mean, most intellectuals are basically collaborators, and they tell the story of the establishment. There's just a handful of academics in the United States and the world who actually challenge that narrative and story of the oppressors, that is the establishment itself. And for that reason, then they attempted people delegitimize them and to say that they're the problem and that they should remain out of the academy. This has happened to friends of mine. It was an attempt to do that same thing to me. My friend Stephen Salita was ran out of the academy at University of Illinois because of his stance for Palestinians. There's been others that are less known who have also been ran out of the academy. This is a part of the history. So it also occurs, I know, in journalism, in media, that people are ran out of media or even killed. Say, for instance, Gary Webb himself. I have no doubt in my mind that his death wasn't a suicide. That these kinds of things happen in order to keep the establishment's narrative out there, and it front as if it's true, and actually it's fake, and it's designed to get people to be obedient to the system.
Well, I would say about Gary Webb, I mean, who some listeners, because we have a very wide, I'm happy to say, very diverse audience running from probably a few teenagers and people in their young early 20s to more elderly folks like me. But those not familiar with Gary Webb, he is, of course, the reporter who first revealed what was instantly denied, and he was, the entire media beat up on him, was that the CIA was involved in cocaine trafficking to support the Contras in Nicaragua. And he was beat up on, but subsequently, virtually everything he wrote was true. Now, I can't say 100%, but I got to say, lots of us have written stuff that we later reread and said, well, I got that part wrong, but it was a good faith effort, and you made every attempt. And Webb fundamentally, he nailed the story. And so whether he ended up allegedly committing suicide, and frankly, I don't know. I mean, that's what I've always heard. You said he might have been murdered. I will tell you, I don't know about that. But whether he was murdered or committed suicide, he was driven to his death because he dared to challenge the conventional wisdom, and he paid with his life for doing it.
Exactly.
The story that I've heard is that he was so deeply despondent and depressed about having his journalism career destroyed because he had the audacity and courage to reveal this information and then stand behind it when his editors at the San Jose Mercury News abandoned him. Yeah, I heard he was despondent that he killed himself, but either way, he paid with his life for journalism, and I admire that man.
Yeah, exactly. But these are the things I think. I mean, look, just so you know, kid, I'm not a pessimist by any means. I'm just pessimistic intellectually, but I'm optimism of the will.
Me too.
That's a Gramsci saying.
Yeah. Optimism of the will.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been a pessimist politically for most of my life, but I think this is the best opportunity we've had in my adult life, which goes back for some time. I wasn't around for the 60s I wasn't politically active in the 1960s. So I didn't see that bright, shining moment. However it turned out, to me, it was a bright, shining moment around the world. And this is the first time since then that I feel like we could be on the verge of something really, really exciting. So I am definitely optimism of the will.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I remember when I don't know if you remember that night when Trump was elected and how people were despondent and there were folks crying, primarily white people, crying and carrying on and saying this is the end of the world.
Right.
And then Saturday Night Live did a show with Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, and it was like, when people said this is the most devastating thing that ever happened to the country. And they were saying, oh, really? Oh, so slavery wasn't devastating? That kind of thing, right?
Right.
So for me, when Trump was elected, I saw it as an opportunity for America to confront the lies that it tells itself and to transform itself.
Right.
And that's what I see. So Trump is an opportunity, a gift, if you will. And that's one of the things I would say about Obama, that he was a gift because he showed people who are Black that you can't get your liberation through the political system for the first time in a long while. And so now we're at a different moment. And that's why I say the country has fundamentally shifted conscious-wise, culturally-wise, and political. And you can see that at the local level. With who's getting elected, with say Tiffany Caban and Queens getting elected as district attorney, and the kinds of stuff that she's advocating, and others around in the South getting elected in Birmingham, the mayor of Birmingham, and so and those kinds of people. So things are significantly changing. We just don't see them. It's not reported by social media and in the regular old traditional media itself. CNN and all those guys, but the change is coming, and I'm very optimistic about it.
That makes me happy because I say this all the time, and most people are like, "You're crazy. That things have never been worse." I think things have never been better because people are fed up and more aware of what's going on and disgusted, and we're a step away from something really positive.
Exactly.
So, look, honey, we got to bring this to a close only because of the time limitation. But I got one final question for you. It's an easy one, not even about politics, because I like to ask people also, what sort of music are you listening to these days? If I want to listen to the Johnny Williams playlist, give me.
Well, I listen to Fela Kuti, Afro pop.
So be more specific. Give me some examples.
Well, he's got one called Colonial Mentality. He also has one called Expensive Shit. And he got one talking about the generals. It's called ADDO, overdone, overdue, and zombie, why it is that soldiers just follow orders and don't question them, or people do this. And so you may see me on a Twitter do a hashtag zombie regarding collaborators within the Black community and so forth, people who think they're not collaborating, but they are, not just pointed out, that this is basically helping to sustain white supremacy and class oppression and stuff like that. But I also listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to Coltrane. I listen to Miles Davis. I listen to Mingus. I listen to just a lot of good stuff.
Nice.
I listen to Cyrus Chestnut. I got an eclectic way of feeling about music. I also listen to Jimi Hendrix. I listen to the Bee Gees. I mean, I got all kinds of.
hey, look, never.
Yeah, I go all the way back. So so then I also listen to a lot of. You probably never heard of them, but Frankie Beverly Mays, Joy and Pain, Sunshine and Rain, and then Earth, Wind and Fire.
Earth, Wind and Fire I saw when I was a kid. So.
Yeah, I saw them, but Maurice White was still alive. But I saw them in Waterbury, Connecticut, with everybody together. It was real nice.
It sounds very nice.
Yeah.
Well, look, one of these days when you come down to Washington, Babylon, or I head up your way, we got to get together for drinks and listen to some great music.
All right, yeah, and then I listen to a lot of reggae too. Just keep that in mind.
I love a lot of what you said. A lot of your music taste overlaps with mine.
Okay, all right, good.
Talk about it. I like Latin music a lot. I like African music a lot. I love reggae. I love Bob Marley. I love Ethiopian music.
Yeah.
And I love "Gimme Shelter" by the Rolling Stones, or I have eclectic. My politics are eclectic, and so is my taste in music.
I hear you.
It's great to have you on, and look forward to talking to you more, seeing more of your work. I hope in Washington, Babylon, and especially to having a few drinks and listening to music together one day. Elliot Sperber, it is a pleasure to have you on the Washington Babylon podcast. We have never met, but somehow, I don't remember how exactly. I mean, I guess we were Facebook friends originally. We just realized we were kindred spirits, similar interests, similar but not identical politics, which is why you're on today, because we have some differences of opinion about the 2020 election that we're going to discuss. But I'm very fond of you. You're the Aesthetics and Anesthetics editor of Washington Babylon, which you just launched as part of our website about a month and a half ago. It's completely transformed it. But tell listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. I live in Brooklyn with my wife and daughter and cat in the heart of the Satmar ultra-Orthodox enclave, which is always bizarre. It's like 90 degrees outside. I'm looking out my window and watching men walking around in fur hats and coats. Actually, they're not wearing their fur hats today, but big, felt hats or something.
I know only too well. I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I'm a non-practicing attorney and writer, covering I guess political and philosophical kinds of issues, and I write poems too, which have been getting a little bit of attention lately.
And we have published some of your poetry as well in the Aesthetics and Anesthetics.
That's actually how I got pulled into the Washington Babylon Sphere by, I can't remember her name, Annie.
Yeah.
So she contacted me before I had contact with you, and she asked me if I wanted to contribute to this Earth Day special. And then I submitted something, and I don't think it went up, and then she disappeared. And then I heard from you, and I thought it was related to that, and then things went from there. But it's been a lot of fun so far, being with Washington Babylon.
Cool. Well, that's great. And we do, one of these days, we're definitely going to have a drink or smoke a joint or do something to relax and talk about something other than politics. Although I do love that. So that's what we're going to do today. If Elliot has a problem with smoking a joint, then Andrew, edit that out.
No, I'll have a joint, or I don't like vaping. I prefer joints.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for New York to follow the rest of the I don't know, enlightened world, and legalize recreational marijuana, because it's ridiculous that Colorado and Washington and California and all these places have it, and here it's just, I don't know.
Well, you got to come down and visit.
Ridiculous.
We have to have like a Washington Babylon retreat, and we can all smoke legal weed down here. So anyway, let's talk politics though. So the reason I've been wanting to have you on, because you're doing aesthetics and anesthetics, but the immediate impetus is that I wrote a piece for the website, which was a semi-satirical piece, but trying to make a serious point. And I was deadly serious about it, which is that I think that it wouldn't be the worst thing if Trump was reelected in 2020. In fact, I pretty much at this point favor it. I detest Trump, however, and in the piece I said I'm endorsing, I would get out and knock on doors for Congresswoman Omar and AOC as her vice president, because I like Omar a little bit better, actually. I think she's a little bit more independent. I think that Trump can, what I basically was arguing was that the reaction to Trump, and I'm aware that, German communists said after Hitler up and that sort of thing, but and this we probably will disagree on, I don't think the country is teetering on the brink of a fascist takeover. I dislike Trump. The closest thing to fascism we have are the immigration camps, which are disgusting and which I've spent much of the last year reporting on, so I'm not unaware of that. I just think that the Democrats have such a shit field that we're going to end up with a crap Democrat, or Bernie will, to appease, if by some miracle, which I frankly don't think is possible, if Bernie gets the nomination, he'll pick some crap Democrat, just like, well, Hillary is a crap Democrat, and then she picked another crap Democrat, Mark Warner, to be her vice. There's a reasonable chance, I know it's speculation, because you rebutted my piece at Washington Babylon, because we believe in free speech. I'm the editor, I started it, but we have lots of different voices, including people on the right. And as long as, I don't tolerate fascists or Nazis or pedophiles, or there's certain things that, like, hey, if other outlets want to publish them, fine. I don't read it, and I have no interest, and I won't allow that shit on my website or on our podcast. But I believe in diversity of opinion, and I don't believe I have a monopoly on truth. So you rebutted my argument, and I'll close quickly, and I'm going to really give you the floor, but I just want to sum it up. But I think there is a reasonable chance Bernie will die in office if he's elected. And I think Bernie should, if he had the good of the country at heart, he would step aside and endorse a younger female. I want a generational gender and racial change. Now, maybe that's too optimistic, but I think Bernie should step aside or run as a vice and say, for the good of the country, I'm too old. I'm going to be the vice president. I know this is dreaming too, but I'll be the vice presidential candidate for somebody. AOC can't run. Omar can't run. Fine. That's why the piece was satirical. So I want you to rebut my argument. You've rebutted it partly in Washington Babylon, but now I've given you a few more things to think about. And the reason I invited you on is that Counterpunch, which I founded even before Alex Coburn came aboard in 1993, and then he came aboard in 94, and which I have a great deal of respect for, and Jeffrey St. Clair is a good friend, and Joshua Frank, and it's a fraternal publication. They published I actually didn't read it because I'm just not interested in myself enough to read 9,000 words about, why it's wrong. But they published a piece, and I'm totally cool with it. It ginned up traffic for both our sites, and that's what, we're in the business of. We got to make money. Traffic equals money. I found the little bit I know about the piece, because I couldn't get past the first. I mean, there was a typo in the first sentence. I hate to be snotty, but that's not a good sign. I skimmed the first 100 words, and it just seemed stupid. And then all sorts of people chimed in saying this is an idiotic argument. They're taking your clearly satirical argument, but recognizing that I was making a real case. And they've written, apparently, I mean, I didn't get past 100 words, but apparently 9,000 words, that's like a small book. So I think if that's true, it's even more preposterous. So I was thinking, who can I have on? There are lots of smart analysts out there, but I'm, getting ready to leave town. I'm in a rush. And I didn't first think, Elliot, I mean, you already rebutted me on Washington Babylon. You're smart. We have similar views, but you disagree with me. So I didn't want to have, the two authors. I can't even remember the second guy's name, and the other guy never heard of Wall Street, who apparently generates a lot of animosity based on the reaction to his piece. But I didn't want two dipshits, to put it bluntly, on the podcast. Why debate, subgrade people? You're smart. You wrote a really intelligent, thoughtful rebuttal of my satirical piece, and your piece was a little satirical too. So I'm challenging you, Elliot. Why the hell should I be rooting for a shit Democrat or a Democrat who might die in office and will appease, certainly even Bernie, if he picks a decent vice president? He hasn't shown courage on Venezuela. He hasn't shown courage on gun control. He hasn't even shown the courage that AOC has shown and others on the concentration camps, which are euphemistically called detention camps. So I'm not sold on Bernie. He's the best candidate that's likely to win. I'm closer to him politically, but I just can't really get behind him or any of the other Democrats. So my view is Trump is evil, but he's probably going to win. I don't want to waste my time, on a lost cause. And then 2024, it's the left's turn. And then people like you and I have thoughtful conversations about what's good for the country and how to rescue the country from the destruction that the Clintons, the Bushes, and Donald Trump and Barack Obama have inflicted on this poor, suffering country. So that's it. I shut up. Take over. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks. I mean, there's so many issues that are wrapped up in that, and it's hard to really disentangle them all. And I want to start talking about just the end of the Cold War and this whole kind of tradition to one global superpower, and what the United States did, and how all of the people you just mentioned, well, of course, George H.W. Bush, and then then the Clintons, and then George W. Bush, and then Obama sort of continuing the Clinton policies, and now there's Trump, and they're all kind of going in the same direction. And then Trump, of course, deviates in certain respects, more on a superficial level, from the trajectory that the U.S. was following globally. Mm-hmm. But just in the title, when I saw your article online, I just sort of groaned, and I thought, no, I don't want to even have to address this. I don't want to have to rebut this, but I just thought it just looked so bad because, Trump is just so awful. And yes, I know that in so many respects, he's doing things that are. Pardon? In so many, but I'm sorry. I know in so many respects he's doing things that are maybe even less brutal than Obama. Yeah. But he's also invigorating this fascist tendency that is really deeply rooted in ICE and in Border Patrol. And I don't know if you've paid attention to these 14 words and number 88 and all of their little signs that they've been issuing in press releases. And these things that echo neo-Nazi movements like the Order, and things that are in the Turner Diaries, and the people that have looked into these various texts and these various neo-Nazi movements and white supremacist movements in the United States. You see it all over throughout these these agencies, and they are carrying out to some degree, a genocidal campaign. That's their aim.
Yeah,
to make this, and so they're actually doing this, and Trump.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with the word genocidal, but
it's genocidal in now the Genocide Convention. If one reads it closely, we'll see that there are several like subsections to what constitutes genocide, and destroying a group by murdering them is only part. Doing it and also doing it with the requisite intent, but transferring children and what's called sort of euphemistically cultural genocide is literally part of the Genocide Convention, and the way it's been developed in case law and in interpretation in the decades since the Genocide Convention was adopted. There's been a tendency to sort of set aside some of those things because all of the major nation states in the world would be guilty of genocide.
Hey, Elliot,
yeah.
I have to interrupt for just quickly because I just want to make very sure that listeners do not think that when I say I'm not sure it's genocide, that I'm in no way. I've been arguing, and I'm so glad AOC broke the barrier, the mainstream barrier by saying these are concentration camps. And I think there's no question about that. You herd a racially despised minority or minorities into brutal conditions, beat the shit out of them out of sight, deny them any sort of due process. They can be there as long as the government decides. You keep out independent visitors like the Nazis kept out the Red Cross, or they showed them a Potemkin village, which is what ICE does. You don't allow independent journalists in. These are there's no question they're concentration camps. And because people are dying at these camps too, needlessly, I would not use the term death camp at this point. And
I would just like to distinguish one point, which is that I'm not necessarily saying that this is genocide. I think that's a question of fact that needs to be determined. Yeah. What I'm saying is that it's a blatant position of neo-Nazis to pursue genocide.
Yeah,
and they are so present in ICE and in Border Patrol and in these other agencies, and this is what they want to do. And for them, I would say, they are probably doing as much as they can to bring about their stated goal of making this country as wide as possible and eliminating groups that they see as their enemy.
Yeah. I don't, it's not, and I'm not, look, I'm Jewish. I lost half my family in the Holocaust, but Jews don't have a lock on suffering. Native Americans were exterminated. Almost entirely. So people have suffered worse than the Jews. So just also to clarify, this is not some Jewish thing. We've seen genocides. We've seen, the slaughter of 1 million Indonesians by members of the Communist Party in the 60s, which was a legal political party in a U.S.-backed coup and with help of the United States. I would consider that, 1 million people very, very quickly were exterminated. I'm not sure what to call that. It's not exactly genocide because, although there was a racial element to it also, but it's mass murder on a scale that's as horrifying as the Holocaust, which killed 12 million people, half of them Jews and half of them, communists or gypsies or, anything else they decided. So I'm not really, I just want to make clear that I think you and I both are sickened and disgusted, and I'm in no way, that the immigration.
But also, just one last point is that one doesn't need to physically kill all of these, members of a group or people for it to constitute genocide, because I think it's Article 2E of the Genocide Convention states the child removal and things like things of that nature also constitute genocide, literally per the convention. That's in the text. So these are things like you don't have to kill people just with the requisite intent to destroy people's language, to destroy their culture, to remove them from their communities. That's genocidal. And
I didn't know. Okay, I didn't know that. I mean, I'm not a. You know more about the Genocide Convention than I do. I think we can definitely, though, agree in general that we're both appalled and disgusted. For me, I mean, just because I want to broaden the conversation, but one further question about immigration. I mean, I've spent most of the last year writing about immigration. I mean, I wrote 3 stories for Yahoo News, and I got into Adelanto, a concentration camp for detainees in California, and I'm working on several stories now, and I'm sickened by it. But I've heard from a lot of advocates. Hey, the Obama policy was, and this gets to the point of why should I get excited about some shit Democrat? Right. Obama's policies were terrible. He emphasized apprehensions at the border. So under Obama, ICE was apprehending people at the border and keeping them out. Trump is emphasizing arrest and deportation, which is totally sick. But Obama was hardly progressive. His immigration policies sucked. Right. And so I think, great. So we get some, Elizabeth Warren okay, you can say they're better than Trump, but I still argue. And then I want to, my main point, and even though I'm not convinced I'm right, I'm just thinking aloud when I wrote that piece, and I'm thinking aloud now, why not, suffer the country? I mean, and look, don't get me wrong. People may think I'm some dilettante trust fund kid. I mean, I'm struggling for money. I'm not poor. I don't really compare my own situation to people living in the ghettos of this country or detainees in these horrible concentration camps. But money is everyday worry for me. So I'm not like callously, making some intellectual argument. I'm thinking Trump creates a reaction. It's a risk, I admit. Maybe we get flat out fascism, but I don't think so. And I think maybe Trump creates a reaction and we're not going to get through and this is why my whole argument was satirical too. I don't believe that Omar and AOC would ever be allowed to win as Democrats. It's going to take a street movement, and Trump will bring about a street movement.
Okay, that's I think a very, very important point, and I think that can bring us back to what I was attempting to do and address your article in the first place, which was that the title of yours, the left should support Trump, is satirical, but it raises the question, well, what should the left do? And I don't think the left should support Trump. But I don't think that the left should necessarily support Bernie either, because you can see like what's going to happen with Bernie. He's not going to be able to get people hate him. They're going to smear him. They're going to railroad him. They're going to
they being the media as well.
So I don't see and the Democrats are collaborators of Trump at this point anyway, and they're pursuing the same type of nationalistic and capitalistic endeavor that they've been doing together since this new type of arrangement of what the Republican and Democratic Party have become in their sort of their class interests are being pursued, but I don't think that Trump being in office is going to inspire any type of resistance that he hasn't already. And I mentioned, I think in the beginning of my article, that this argument that you're making sort of reminded me of one that Alexander Coburn made in, I guess it was 2012, when he was saying, the left should support Mitt Romney. Because, if Mitt Romney wins, well, Obama somehow lulled the anti-war movement to sleep. But with Romney in office, this would awaken the anti-war movement.
I disagree with Alex.
Well, I disagree with that. I disagree with that too.
But Romney is not Trump.
Well, I know, but I don't think that Romney would have awoken any sort of anti-war movement, and I don't think you can rely on any sort of negative presence to awaken what should be ultimately an awakening of a class consciousness and a sense of solidarity, and that should happen, irrespective, and can happen with somebody who's just as bad as Obama. So on a practical level, I don't think that there should be, any support, even rhetorically, or of Trump, and maybe just on a practical level, support of a Democrat, because they might just help turn public opinion toward the real crises that we're confronting with global warming. Every week there's another catastrophe that's being kind of normalized at the same time as it's being exposed. That's a huge thing, and that's going to require really a vigorous anti-capitalistic movement to adequately confront, this economy and this war machine are generating so many greenhouse gases per hour, chopping down forests. There was just an article that came out the other day, which has been written about before, but now there's been a study showing how many trees need to be planted to absorb a sufficient amount of CO2, and there's something like 1 trillion trees throughout the world, and certain locations were designated as being better suited than others to grow trees, and that should be pursued. That should be an international policy that could be done. You don't need any new technology. You just need people and seeds, and this is something that could be done. And I think that
okay, but Elliot, I'm not, and I mean, I have no issues with what you're saying.
I know it's off track.
I want you to get what should the left do in 2020? Okay, because you said you did, and I obviously don't think the left should support Trump. And I think
at this point, it's so far into the future that I think it's ultimately a distraction to waste time talking about what's going to happen in 2020. It's so far down the road. People don't really have any control over it unless they have money. It's something that I think that should be ignored because it is a distraction. It's a circus, and I think that all the effort that goes into it should be spent discussing things that people can actually do on a concrete basis to connect with other people that are in their communities and make connections across more distant spaces and develop a real vigorous anti-state, anti-capitalistic, classless society. That I think should be the thing. And you see all these people talking about these right and left alliances, and that is something that's been done so many times and leads to fascism and just emboldens and empowers the right and confuses the left, and that's something that needs to be pulled away from. And I think what the left needs to do is to support itself and not the right, and to develop and flesh out a pretty a platform which in some respects is being worked out as we speak. There's the discussion of the Green New Deal, and the Green New Deal is inadequate, but the critique of the Green New Deal brings up its inadequacies and will bring about an adequate response that could, even the concept that there's something like a Green New Deal, as problematic as it is, as problematic as the New Deal was, and as limited as what's being suggested in the Green New Deal. At least there's some sort of concept of a major project that could be undertaken. The trees comes back to mind, and all sorts of other things like that. That's something the left should be focusing on. I think.
No, I mean, look, that makes sense, and that I agree with you that in some ways it's a waste of time to be talking about it, because the thing is, the whole shit show primaries haven't even started, and they're so, we have no, I love the point you made. Unless you have a lot of money, you have no ability to influence what's going to happen. And then you've got, these where at least what were once were and still are primarily whiter states, Iowa and New Hampshire coming up first, and then South Carolina. Democrat has to get through South Carolina, and we're looking at 8 months down the road And so by the time all these people, anybody on the left is pretty much going to get whittled out. There's going to be, of the 20 or so Democrats, in next March or April, then we'll know like who is likely to be Trump's opponent, and whether it's going to be, does Bernie still have a chance, which I think does change things in terms of like the realities of the election, even though I don't think I couldn't get super excited about it. But if somehow Bernie were to become the nominee, that totally changes the calculation from the moment. Because my calculation is he's not going to be the nominee. But
he might not be. It's up in the air. You mentioned earlier, like, oh, you think he would die in office, and I was thinking this is something that I didn't address in the response that I wrote, but I was thinking about it after the fact that, his dying in office could actually work out well, because as with like JFK dying in office, LBJ. And of course, LBJ was a brilliant kind of tactician and had tons and tons of experience in the Senate and in the House as well, and knew all these people, knew how to get things done. But there was so much sympathy that was generated by the death of JFK and, an assassination, that he was able to push through a lot of things that he might not have been able to push through otherwise. Now, of course, LBJ did all sorts of other horrible things and made all sorts of mistakes, in escalating the Vietnam War and all of that. But the point is that, we don't know what's going to happen. These are all counterfactuals. Everything's up in the air. There's like radical contingency in all of these things. It's possible with the right kind of, that Bernie's death in office could work out well for his agenda, depending on who his vice president is, and depending on what kind of public pressure exists at the time of such a hypothetical death. So, it might even be better,
right.
For all we know.
For all we know, but that's a lot of hypotheticals too, just like my hypotheticals.
Right.
And
so we have to. Yeah. So we just have to play, what is in front of us.
I think that you made a lot of good points, and I want to disagree a little bit about one thing, and then basically agree, but distinguish on, or maybe clarify on another. On the one hand, it's too early to talk about the election, and the other hand, it's not. I mean, I get disgusted. I mock always the Washington Post, which I don't even read. It's like so worthless in the Times. I mean, I used to think they were essential reading, and now I really don't. I mean, but the idea that it's a circus. It's a political circus. We have, primarily shit candidates, and the elite control the process, and it's not a self-determined outcome, or it's not a guaranteed outcome, but we will get a president who's acceptable to the New York Times op-ed board and to, the broad, like, oligarchy that runs this country. I mean, so, obviously,
the broad oligarchy that runs this country, then that actually, as it concentrates wealth into ever smaller hands, is tiny. It's a tiny group of people, right? So that's something else. That's, well, I mean, when you look at how many people are in this country, over 300 million people, what's 1% of that? I mean, it's still a few million, but within that 1%, it's really a much far fewer people that are pulling the strings, and it would be, the object, the goal of the left shouldn't even be to maintain the nation state. The goal of the left should be to have international, revolution and do away with the nation state and have, I mean, I think John Lennon, Imagine, that song is really radical, and I don't think most people even are at that level where they could see, oh yeah, my political goals or my political position is just stated in that song. Just imagine no countries. Like, it's not that hard to do. That's what the left should be doing. We shouldn't be talking about the United States, what's in the best interest of the United States. We should be talking about what's in the interest of people.
And the majority of people on this planet who are desperately poor, near poor, or struggling not to become poor.
Right.
I mean,
So once we start talking about like the United States, we become nationalists,
but
in talking about the election.
no, okay, I agree with you. But my point is that, yeah, we have a process that's controlled by the oligarchy, so we're not going to get a great candidate. However, I would argue there are two reasons that we should be talking about the election now. One, from a cynical point of view, is that I wrote an article that attracted enough attention and got a lot of clicks and a 9,000-word rebuttal from Counterpunch, and that's good for business. I'm being a little bit facetious, but not entirely.
Okay.
But the second related point, and which is the serious part, is that even though you and I and many people agree that the whole process is a shit show, people are talking about the election, even some of our friends. And if they weren't, we wouldn't be writing about it. If this was, how to roast the best marshmallow, you might actually do a meme of the day for Aesthetics and Anesthetics that included a marshmallow recipe, and that would be funny. But we wouldn't be devoting a podcast to that topic. People are talking about
it. And it brings issues to light, like Medicare for all, which is important. And that's something that, should be focused on. And that's something that could, but this is, of course, is something that people in this country for decades have supported. There's so many issues, there's so many things in this country that you have something like 70% of support for. Marijuana legalization, certain types of decriminalizing various things, and Medicare for all, and I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but there are tons of issues that you just certain, like funding public transportation, raising taxes on the rich, all of these things that concern environmental protection that are just ignored, by the public. So on one hand, we can be cynical and say, okay, what's the point? On the other hand, we can say, well, it's great that Medicare for all is such a central part of the debates and the platforms of the front runners, except for Joe Biden, who just seems to be supported by these false polls, that are polling just old people with landlines and omitting certain categories or certain age groups altogether. But it seems like public opinion is really just solidifying around the idea that it's really time to join the rest of the civilized world, if that's maybe a problematic way of phrasing it, and have some sort of Medicare for all. And this shouldn't be a business. The thing that always bothers me is that so many of these things, and within a capitalist economy, but it's so blatant within healthcare, is that it's a total conflict of interest. This shouldn't be a commodity.
Right. Well, listen, we got to bring this to a close. I have one final thought, and then I want your thoughts. But this is actually, I think that we need to wrap this up quickly.
Okay.
But I do agree with something you said earlier that I think is really important, which is that, we, in many ways, the election is irrelevant, but it's not, because we're going to have to live with the outcome. It's irrelevant because we have no money, so we don't matter. But I do agree that what we're witnessing, and why I disagree, this, I think Alex was writing at a time about Romney, where I think Romney wouldn't, even now, like a moderate Democrat or a moderate Republican will not generate street protest and really a street movement, which is what I think we need. Right. And I do disagree. I disagreed with Alex at the time, and I disagree with Alex about a lot of things, like his positions on gun. We have an epidemic of violence in this country. It doesn't make sense. The Fifth Amendment, I'm not in favor of abolishing it, but I don't think it includes, any category of weapon, which I believe Alex in his latter days may have come close to saying or endorsed entirely. I certainly disagreed with many of his views on gun control, but I do, he also inspired me to get into journalism. So, a hero to me also. Let me make sure to be clear on that. But I think we're at a different point in time now. And I think, Trump is a much bigger threat than Romney, and he could generate the street protest. But more importantly, the reason I'm optimistic about the future and not 2020, but 2024, and the likelihood of a mass movement, not just here, but in other parts of the world. And I've been saying this with other podcast guests and on, in my writing, but I think, capitalism has just run out of steam. When the 29 crash came along, it took a long time for them to work it out. And, ultimately FDR's New Deal was a pretty, in terms of American capitalism, it was about as good as it got for the working class. It was
World War II that really pulled everything out. The New Deal was always too weak.
Right. But however, that's true. But even then, after the end of World War II, there was a point where let's just call it the capitalist class, the upper class, the elite, the oligarchy said, we're making so much money, we won't.
They were also terrified of the threat of revolution, and they were terrified of a working class and a bunch of vets coming home, who had a very radical and especially a relatively, compared to today, a sense of class consciousness, right. And so that GI Bill and things like that and all the other stuff was given out, to placate and mollify this population, but at the same time, it was something that had included all sorts of racist provisions, redlining and blockbusting and things like that came out of it.
Of course, look, the left in this country was smashed in the 1910s and 20s and 30s. I mean, it's always been the carrot and the stick. Come along, we'll give you the GI Bill. If you don't come along, we'll crack your head. I mean, that I agree with. What I'm saying though is the New Deal, and then the post-World War II era, next to today, was very progressive. In the late 60s, early 70s, the oligarchy decides we no longer are willing to share crumbs with the workers, and so they Reagan comes along, and even with Carter, and it took a while to figure it out, but what they came up with was neoliberalism. Now that's dead, and it's dying. It's in its death throes, and they have nothing to replace it with, and they won't come up with anything. Because we have a greedy capitalist class. The capitalist class is always greedy, but now they're their worst. I mean, Warren Buffett, I'm not going to say good things about Warren Buffett, but if you compare him to Jeff Bezos, he looks like, a fucking saint. And now we have an uber greedy capitalist class that doesn't give a shit. They don't want, so they've given up. All they want to do is buy their personal bunkers and write out the Holocaust. And so, or the apocalypse. So I think, as scary as that is, that we are going to see a mass movement developing in the next few years in a reaction to Trump or something not quite as bad as Trump. In 2024, by 2024, this shit's going to hit the fan, and that's a good thing. The country is long overdue for another.
I mean, I think that the shit has been hitting the fan for a long time. We see all these concentration camps and these ecological catastrophes are just more shit hitting more fans. I said earlier something about we can't really do anything if you don't have economic power. You can't do anything, and that's only half of the story, of course. And as you pointed out, you want to see a street movement, and it's because people are confused between the power. Economic power is taking the place of political power. Money is speech. All these things that you hear from the Supreme Court. There's this horrible conflation, but people, as I mentioned earlier, the oligarchy is actually very small. So people don't, maybe the oligarchy has all the money, but as Jim Morrison said, they've got or to paraphrase him, right? They've got the money, but we've got the numbers, and so many numbers. So I think that is really what where, and that's where political power lies. Well, Mao might say, it comes out of a gun, but you can shut down, and we've seen historically governments topple because just enough people, stand in a place and don't go. Not a march that passes through in a few hours and goes home, but a march that stays in camps in DC of a few million people and just stays there until until the thing falls. And that's all you need to do. Just if we could get a couple million people to occupy DC, in a totally non-violent way, you could see massive change. And I don't know how much consciousness needs to change, and I don't know if we need to wait till 2024. And I think that
No, I'm not proposing we wait till 2024, but I am proposing that we bring this to a close so that we're just going on a little bit too long, and now we're sort of. So I apologize, Elliot, but we're going to continue the conversation on the podcast, or on another podcast, and in the electronic pages of Washington Babylon.
Okay.
But for today, I thank you for your time.
Well, thanks. No, thanks for having me. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
The following has been produced as part of a crowdfunding campaign for the website Washington Babylon, edited by the investigative journalist Ken Silverstein. If you would like to support Ken's investigation, visit patreon.com/DCBabylon. That's patreon.com/DCBabylon.
It's common to find corrupt members of Congress, but Senator Marco Rubio, really, I can't think of anyone dirtier. Going back to his early days, his brother-in-law, as I recall, was a coke trafficker, and young Marco, as a teenager, used to, as I recall, walk the dogs and mow the lawn of the brother-in-laws. The thing is, you could say, well, he was just the dog walker or the lawnmower, but this was a major coke trafficker, and little Marco never noticed anything funny. I mean, they were dealing a ton of, well, I don't want to say 2,000 pounds. It probably was more. I don't really know. It was a major drug trafficking operation, and little Marco was too goddamn stupid to notice anything, or maybe he did notice something, and they paid him, $100 an hour to walk the dogs. I mean, I can't answer that question, but that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at. There are so many. He has a long-time association with one of the most crooked individuals in the state of Florida. And when you say one of the most crooked individuals in the state of Florida, I mean, I don't even know what compares to that. I mean, in the city of New Orleans, I mean, in the city of Chicago, in the outer circles of hell, David Rivera, they are long-time party friends, love to party, love to go out on the town and have a good time, love to consort with lobbyists. He's a family man, so I would not want to cast aspersions on he or Mr. Rivera. However, if one were to do a Google search, one would find some very interesting things. I've written a few things about Mr. Rubio. I won't call him Senator Rubio. That's a degraded term as it is. But this is a guy who, I wrote a story for the New York Observer. Anybody can Google my name, Marco Rubio, and I did a few stories, but one in particular will come up about his real estate transactions, where, let's just say he obtained his first house. I think he had 3 houses. I can't remember how many lady friends. Just friends. I mean, not saying they were girlfriends or lovers. I'm just saying they were intimate companions. Good family man. So I wouldn't want to suggest in any way there was more than that. But you can read my New York Observer piece where he declined comment on anything having to do with how he obtained housing, his homes very, 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 very cheaply, and always managed to make money on these real estate transactions where campaign donors or bankers he knew, or people who might, again, I don't want to cast aspersions, but people who might want favors from Mr. Rubio helped him out. There was a crooked doctor involved in one of these transactions, a Medicare fraudster. He's got a lot of interesting friends. And he had no comment about this. I mean, if I were called and said, are you a crook? And do you like to party with David Rivera? And do you have some intimate lobbyist female companions? I don't care personally what people do in their private lives, but if you're a U.S. senator, as Mr. Rubio is, a lot of what he does has the appearance of impropriety. So I'll be looking into the dirty, dirty past of this man, but I'll be also focusing on his disgusting role as the chief cheerleader and sponsor of the attempt to overthrow the government of Venezuela. I mean, I would say the three most powerful individuals all should be rotting in jail cells are Rubio, John Bolton, and Elliot Abrams. And Rubio was there first. I mean, Trump ultimately bears responsibility for the criminal sanctions that are punishing the people of Venezuela, strangling the country, and not harming the leadership. And no question, there is serious corruption among the leadership in the Venezuelan government. I mean, that's not even open to question. However, they're not hurting President Maduro in any way. I understand why the Venezuelan people are tired and exhausted, and they are not happy necessarily with President Maduro. But I have been to Venezuela a few months ago, and I'll be going back as part of my reporting, in addition to going down to Florida. So we very definitely need to raise some money for this story. And, you know, the situation there, I'm not going to say it's 100% the cause of the United States, but you read newspaper stories where they say the people are starving. Well, the government does give a monthly food basket to everybody in the poor areas, which is most of the country. I saw it with my own eyes and wrote about it at Washington Babylon, Caracas Chronicles. If you Google that and Washington Babylon, you'll find this story. You'll find pictures. I was in the poor areas where I was, you know, fed, well taken care of. I'm not going to say Venezuela is a paradise. Of course it's not. It's a very difficult situation. It's complicated, but if there's any man who is evil in regard to his conduct towards Venezuela, it's Marco Rubio. I mean, you have to sort of wonder, because he's, you know, famously, his family were Cuban fascists, anti-Castro. But I don't know why he's got a hard-on for Venezuela. I mean, and this is one of the things I'll be looking at. Something's there. You know, maybe he took some dirty money, speculation, of course, from a Venezuelan businessman close to the government and got burned on the deal. I don't know what his obsession is. And lastly, I am also going to be focusing on his best friend in Venezuela, Leopoldo Lopez, praised in the U.S. media as a hero and a freedom fighter. I can guarantee you this guy is going to look very, very ugly when I'm done with my reporting. His family is extremely rich. They own a lot of property. I don't believe all that property was obtained legally or that they've disclosed the ownership of it. And Leopoldo Lopez is a party goer just like Marco Rubio. You know, Marco used to mow the lawn for coke traffickers. I don't know. I mean, I've just heard stories. It may have just been NyQuil, but, you know, from what I understand, Mr. Lopez, the Trump administration's bitch in Venezuela, and Marco Rubio's God knows what, potentially a business partner, who the hell knows. They are not going to be happy with what I report. That's what I can guarantee you. I can't guarantee you I'll uncover every stone and find every fact, but I will guarantee you that Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, and Leopoldo Lopez are going to be pissed off when they see my reporting. All I'm looking for is $1,200 because I know everybody's pressed for money. That's not even going to cover my costs. I'm looking for money elsewhere. I'm trying to find a sponsor that'll pay for my plane ticket to Venezuela. I mean, there's $1,200. You know, the expenses aren't going to come close. I got to go to Florida. I'm happy to do it. It's going to be a great reporting trip. Down to Miami, possibly Tallahassee, and to Caracas. So that's not going to be, you know, at $1,200, I'm going to lose. But I'm going to raise other money, and we'll publish some great stories at Washington Babylon, and I'll probably publish a few stories elsewhere to make money, because I got to hustle. Because, as you know, journalism is not the most profitable profession unless you are, well, like a lot of our U.S. journalists, not terribly critical or skeptical or honest. And that's the fastest route to success. But we try to do a little bit better at Washington Babylon.
Preceding has been produced as part of a crowdfunding campaign for the website Washington Babylon, edited by the investigative journalist Ken Silverstein. Music credits are as follows. The songs Hacienda and Akari were produced and distributed by the website Filmstro, while The Internationale was produced by Jerry Engelbach. All music has been used in this package on the basis of properly recognized and adhered to licenses with their creators. If you would like to support Ken's investigation, visit patreon.com/DCBabylon. That's patreon.com/DCBabylon. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next week. This is the Washington Babylon podcast, hosted by Ken Silverstein and produced by Andrew Stewart.